Good evening, friends. Ready for 5 more spine-chilling real horror stories? I'd love to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is. Drop a comment below. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do, and leave a like. It helps me bring more dark tales to you. Now put on your headphones or settle in front of your TV and let's dive into the fear. Spring break was supposed to be unforgettable, and it was. But not for the reasons I wanted. I still don't know what I saw that day. I don't know what I heard. But I do know that something was out there with us. And I know that if we had stayed just a minute longer, I wouldn't be here to tell this story. It started with a simple, stupid decision. Back in college, I was dating a girl named Emily. She was wild in the best and worst ways, impulsive, fearless, always pushing the limits. I was the opposite. I liked control. I liked knowing what was coming next. But I loved her, and I loved the way she made life feel electric. That spring, she invited me to spend the break with her family in North Carolina, near the Pisgah National Forest. Her uncle owned a cabin up there, tucked deep in the woods, far from the nearest town. It was the kind of place that felt untouched by time. Tall, ancient trees, thick mist in the mornings, the kind of quiet that made you feel small. I wasn't sure what to expect, but the first few days were great. Her family was welcoming, the food was amazing, and the scenery was breathtaking. But Emily had one goal in mind: hiking the Black Ridge Trail. It was the kind of trail that locals whispered about. It had been closed for years due to rock slides and flooding, but people said there were other reasons they kept it blocked off. Stories of hikers who went in and never came out. Strange sounds echoing through the trees at night. Things moving in the dark that weren't animals. I didn't believe in any of that. Emily, of course, thought it was all bullshit. So when she suggested we sneak past the barriers and hike it anyway, I didn't even try to stop her. Big mistake. We left early in the afternoon, slipping past the warning signs and stepping onto the forgotten trail. And for a while, it was perfect. No tourists, no noise, just us, the trees, and the sound of our own footsteps crunching against the damp earth. But then we found the first sign that something was wrong. Emily was ahead of me when she suddenly stopped. Her whole body went stiff. I stepped up beside her, about to ask what was wrong. Then I saw it, a dead raccoon. But not just dead, decapitated. Its head was gone and the wound was too precise, too clean. Not an animal attack. This was done with a knife, and the body? It was still fresh. I swallowed hard, forcing logic into my brain. Maybe some hunter? Maybe some sick joke? But Emily wasn't laughing. She just stood there staring, her breathing shallow. "We should keep moving," I said. She didn't argue. We walked in silence for a while, and maybe, just maybe, I started to feel it too. That sense that we weren't alone. That something was watching. The air felt heavier. The trees seemed taller, the shadows darker. Then we heard it. A scream. Not an animal. Not a distant yell. It was human. A woman. And it sounded close. Emily's grip on my wrist was like ice. That scream. It wasn't normal. It was pure, raw terror. The kind that makes your stomach drop and your instincts scream at you to run. But we didn't. We just stood there, frozen. The trees closing in, around us like walls. The silence that followed was too perfect. No wind, no rustling leaves. Even the birds had stopped chirping. The only sound was my own heartbeat, slamming against my ribs like it was trying to break free. Then, a snap. Branch breaking somewhere ahead of us. Something was moving. Emily's breathing turned shallow. She whispered, "We need to go." I nodded, but we had to pass the raccoon's corpse again to get back. I braced myself, already dreading it. But when we rounded the bend, it was gone. Skin turned to ice. I whipped my head around, scanning the trees, searching for any sign of movement. Something had been here. Someone. And then we saw it, a few feet away, hanging from a tree branch by a piece of twine. Was the raccoon. Its legs were tied together. Its chest was split open, and dripping from the torn flesh was a thick, greenish liquid, like something rotting from the inside out. Emily made a choked sound, her hand clamping over her mouth. My own body locked up, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. Who the hell does something like this? Then, another sound. Not behind us. Not ahead. Above. I looked up. At first, I didn't see anything. Just branches, just leaves, just a shape. A figure crouched on a high limb, half hidden by the shadows. Watching us. My breath caught in my throat. It was human, but wrong. I could barely make out details, but something about the way it was perched there, so still, so silent, sent every nerve in my body into overdrive. Then it moved, fast, too fast, dropping from branch to branch with unnatural precision, heading straight for us. Emily screamed. We ran. Branches slashed at my face as we tore through the trees, feet pounding against the dirt, breath ragged and sharp. Something was chasing us. I didn't dare look back. I didn't need to. I could hear it. The thud of footsteps that weren't ours. The scrape of something moving too fast, too precise. Emily stumbled, nearly falling, but I grabbed her arm and yanked her forward. We couldn't stop. If we stopped, we were dead. And then, the scream came again, right behind us. It was so close, so loud, so inhuman that it split through my skull like a razor. It wasn't just fear in that sound. It was pain, agony, hunger. My lungs burned. The trees blurred. I could barely think, barely breathe. Where was the exit? Where were the barricades? Then, through the trees, I saw something. A figure standing near the entrance of the trail. Arms crossed, still. I nearly collapsed from relief. A ranger. A goddamn park ranger. Emily saw him too and gasped, pushing herself harder. We stumbled, onto the main path, panting, half collapsing. We were safe. But the ranger didn't move. He just stood there, looking at us. Not concerned, not confused, just watching. His face was shadowed by his cap, but I could see his mouth. He was smiling. Emily let out a sob. I turned, my stomach twisting into knots, expecting to see whatever the hell had been chasing us. But there was nothing. No movement. No sound. Just the empty woods. The ranger finally spoke. You kids shouldn't be here. His voice was calm. Too calm. Emily was still shaking. There was something. Someone, she gasped. They were chasing us. We heard screaming. We saw. His smile didn't fade. He just shook his head. No, you didn't. His hand lifted, slow and deliberate, pointing to the barricades. You're leaving now. Something in his tone made the hair on my neck stand up. I didn't argue. I grabbed Emily's hand, dragging her toward the exit. My legs weak, my body trembling. We reached the car in seconds, throwing ourselves inside. Emily was crying. I was shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I looked up, one last time. The ranger was still there. Still watching, and behind him, just beyond the trees, a figure, half hidden in the branches, still, smiling. I slammed the gas. We never spoke about it again. I still have nightmares about that cabin. If I close my eyes, I can hear the wind howling through the trees, the distant sound of branches cracking under the weight of something unseen. I can feel the cold, suffocating air pressing against my skin. But worst of all, I can still see it. The man standing outside, watching us. It was supposed to be the perfect spring break trip. Me, my boyfriend Jake, and our two friends Ben and Lisa rented a secluded cabin deep in the woods of North Carolina. We were all broke college students, so a cozy, off-the-grid getaway seemed like the best we could afford. No crowds, no overpriced hotels, just us, a stocked fridge, and miles of untouched wilderness. We got there just before sunset. The road leading up to the cabin was rough, barely more than a dirt path winding through dense forest. The place itself looked straight out of a horror movie, old, isolated, too quiet. It was perched on a hill, with a long wraparound porch and windows that stared out into the endless trees. Something about it felt wrong. I don't know why. Maybe it was the eerie stillness, the way the trees seemed to press in too close. Or maybe it was just my imagination running wild. Ben laughed when I hesitated at the front steps. What? Getting cold feet? Afraid of Bigfoot? I forced a smile and followed them inside. The cabin was old, but nice enough. Wooden beams, a big stone fireplace, dusty furniture that smelled like mildew. The air was thick with the scent of pine and something else. Something stale. We settled in quickly. Lisa started unpacking the food, Ben cracked open a beer, and Jake went to check out the back porch. I was about to join him when I noticed something. The basement door. It was the only part of the cabin that felt off. Unlike the rest of the rustic decor, the basement door was new. Too new. Bright white paint, a heavy-duty deadbolt, and someone had scratched something into the wood, just above the handle. Don't open. A chill crept up my spine. Hey guys, did anyone see this? Ben walked over and scoffed. Great, some Blair Witch bullshit. Probably just the last renters messing around. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But something about that door made my stomach turn. Jake reappeared from the porch, rubbing his arms. It's getting cold. Out. Let's start a fire. I let the basement door go. Maybe Ben was right. Maybe it was just a joke. But that night I woke up to the sound of footsteps on the porch. The footsteps were slow. Deliberate. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The cabin was silent except for the soft creak of wood as someone, moved outside. I turned my head slightly, eyes locked on the thin gap between the curtain and the window. There, in the pale moonlight, a shadow shifted. A figure stood just beyond the porch railing, motionless, watching. A surge of cold terror crashed over me. My fingers dug into the blanket, my body rigid with fear. I wanted to scream, to wake Jake, but my throat felt locked, as if my body refused to make a sound. Then, he moved. The figure stepped closer, just enough for the weak porch light to catch. Him tall, gaunt, hollowed-out eyes that seemed to sink too deep into his skull. His clothes were tattered, his hands hanging unnaturally at his sides, fingers twitching slightly. But what made my stomach lurch, what sent a sickening chill through every nerve in my body, was his mouth. It was open, too wide. Not like a scream, not like a gasp, just open, as if his jaw was broken, or as if he had forgotten how to close it. I clamped my hand over my mouth, heart hammering against my ribs. The man just stood there, staring at the cabin, staring at me. Then, in one grotesque, jerky motion, he lifted his hand and pointed at the door, my entire body locked up. I didn't move. I couldn't move. Then, from the hallway, a sudden crash. I gasped, my paralysis breaking, whipping my head toward the sound. It came from the kitchen. A cabinet? A chair? I didn't know. Jake stirred beside me. What? His voice was thick with sleep. Before I could stop myself, I whispered, "There's someone outside." Jake shot up instantly, eyes wide. He reached for his phone and checked the time, 3:12 a.m. I turned back to the window. The man was gone. For a second, I thought maybe I had imagined him. Maybe it had been a shadow, a trick of the moonlight. But then I heard it, the back door handle. Turning. "Jake!" I gasped. "He's trying to get in." Jake was already up, moving toward the hallway. I scrambled after him, nearly tripping as I grabbed at his arm. "No, wait, don't!" A loud bang shook the back door. Lisa and Ben's bedroom door flew open. "What the hell was that?" Ben hissed, rubbing his eyes. Jake held up a hand, signaling for silence. We all stood there, frozen in the dark, listening. Silence. For a long, horrible moment there was nothing. Just the faint sound of the wind outside, the ticking of the old wall clock. Then, from behind us, the basement door creaked open. A slow, agonizing creak. We all turned in unison, dread crawling up our spines. The basement door, the one that had been locked, was now cracked open, revealing nothing but a yawning black void beyond. I couldn't breathe. Ben took a shaky step forward. "That door was locked," he whispered. Jake grabbed my arm, pulling me behind him. Lisa let out a quiet, terrified sob. Then, from deep within the basement, footsteps, soft at first, then louder, coming up. My stomach twisted into a high, not so tight I thought I'd be sick. My body screamed at me to run, but I was rooted in place, paralyzed by the thing stepping into the dim light of the hallway. It wasn't the man from the porch. It was something worse. The figure moved in jerky, unnatural motions, as if its limbs didn't quite fit together. Its skin was gray, stretched too tight over its bones. Its eyes, God, its eyes, were black pits, hollow and empty, yet somehow locked onto me, only me. And its mouth. It was open, a gaping, hideous hole, unhinged, and impossibly wide, as if it had been screaming for so long it forgot how to close. The thing lurched forward. Lisa screamed. I grabbed Jake's wrist and yanked him back as Ben lunged for the front door. His hands fumbled desperately at the lock. The deadbolt wouldn't turn. The thing took another step, then another. It was fast. I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy, wooden lamp, and threw it with everything I had. It shattered against the thing's shoulder, but it didn't react. It didn't even flinch. Ben finally yanked the door open and we ran, out into the freezing night, through the trees, branches clawing at our skin. My lungs burned, my legs felt like they would give out, but I didn't dare stop. I could hear it, behind us. That awful, unnatural scraping sound like bone dragging against wood. We reached the car. Jake fumbled for the keys, hands shaking so violently he nearly dropped them. I turned back, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The cabin loomed behind us, its windows black and empty. But the door was still open. And from the darkness inside, something watched us. Jake got the car started. The tires kicked up dirt. As we peeled out of there, the trees flashing past in a blur. No one spoke. No one dared to look back. It took us 2 hours to reach a gas station. None of us could stop shaking. We tried calling the Airbnb owner, the police, someone. But we had no service. It wasn't until we reached a small town at dawn that we finally got through. The police checked the cabin. They found our stuff, our bags, our food still on the counter. But the basement door was locked again, and the owner swore there was no basement. Don't know what we saw that night. I don't want to know. But sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, my room too dark, too still, I swear I can hear it. That slow scraping sound, coming closer. I don't know how close we came to dying that night. Maybe seconds, maybe inches. Maybe the only thing standing between us and being butchered on that deserted beach was my dog. I still think about that sometimes. What if I hadn't brought him? Would I even be here to tell you this? Spring break was supposed to be perfect. A secluded beach in Alabama, just me, my 3 closest friends, and a weekend of drinking under the stars. No tourists, no screaming college kids, just waves and sand stretching for miles. It was almost dark by the time we got there. We parked in a gravel lot near the dunes and grabbed our gear, our voices the only sound in the heavy evening air. Something about the silence felt off. The beach should have had somebody around, a fisherman, another camper, but it was completely abandoned. Isabel, the local expert of our group, said it wasn't unusual. People don't come out here much at night, she shrugged, adjusting her backpack. Locals say it's bad luck. Jackson chuckled. Bad luck? Isabel smirked. Yeah, disappearances. Weird stuff. I laughed, but I felt that tiny prickle of unease at the back of my mind. We kept walking. My dog, Rocky, a massive Doberman, trotted ahead, nose to the sand, tail wagging. At least he seemed happy. If something was wrong, he'd know, or at least I thought he would. We set up camp quickly. By the time we finished pitching the tents, it was full dark. The ocean was a black, endless void stretching out to the horizon, the waves whispering. As they curled onto the shore, that's when Ariel noticed the car. Guys, she muttered, that truck's been by twice. We all turned. Up on the narrow dirt road just past the dunes, an old, rusted-out SUV rolled by slowly. It barely had its headlights on, just creeping along like it was looking for something, or someone. The driver's window was down, but the interior was pitch black. We couldn't see a face, couldn't see who was watching us. Then, just as it passed, it stopped. The door opened, and a man stepped out. The man was tall, too tall. His clothes were loose and filthy, his face hidden in the shadows. But what struck me immediately was how he moved, unsteady, slow, like a predator sizing up its prey. Rocky's ears flattened, his body stiffened, a low growl rising from his throat. He sensed it before we did. Jackson and I stepped forward instinctively, putting ourselves between the man and the girls. "Can we help you?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. For a second, the man just stood there. Then, in a voice that slurred like he was drunk, or something worse, he muttered, "You're on my land." I frowned. His land? That didn't make sense. The beach was public. There weren't any houses nearby. I tried to reason with him. "We didn't see any signs, man. We're just camping for the night." He didn't let me finish. With a sudden, jerky movement, he pulled something from his pocket. A knife. The firelight caught the blade as he raised it, shining dull silver in the dark. I barely had time to react before Rocky lunged. The air exploded with snarls and screaming. The man stumbled as 80 pounds of pure muscle slammed into him, teeth sinking deep into his arm. His knife clattered to the sand. He screamed, not just in pain but in rage. Rocky dragged him down, his powerful jaws locked onto the man's wrist, blood dark and thick as it soaked into the sand. I yelled, "Rocky, off!" fearing the man might grab the knife again. Miraculously, Rocky listened. He let go and ran back to my side, his body coiled and ready to attack again. The man staggered to his feet, clutching his mangled arm. For a second I thought he was going to charge at us. His breathing was ragged, his face twisted in something that wasn't just pain, but fury. Then he turned and ran, straight for his SUV. We stood there, frozen, listening as the engine roared, to life. The truck's headlights cut through the darkness, blinding us. The tires kicked up sand as it peeled away, disappearing into the night. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then Isabel's shaky voice broke the silence. "We need to leave." Isabel's words barely left her lips before I saw it. Headlights in the distance. The SUV, coming back. He wasn't leaving. He was circling. I felt it deep in my bones. We were prey. We need to go. Now. My voice came out strangled, my pulse hammering so hard I thought I'd pass out. The girls scrambled to grab our gear, but Jackson grabbed my arm, his face pale. What if he's waiting near the cars? I looked toward the dunes, toward the shadowy trail we'd walked earlier. If he was waiting there, we'd be walking straight into him. "We have to risk it," I said. We stuffed what we could into our backpacks and took off. The beach felt endless, stretching into blackness. The only sound was our breathing, our footsteps kicking up sand, and Rocky, silent and alert, his ears flicking back, sensing something I couldn't. Then I heard it. A crunch. Not from us. From the dunes. I turned my head just in time to see a shadow, a second figure, darting between the brush. There was more than one of them. Ariel gasped, stumbling to a stop. "There's someone." I grabbed her wrist and yanked her forward. "Move! Move! Move!" We sprinted over the dunes, the parking lot coming into view. Our cars were still there, but as we got closer, my stomach dropped. All 4 tires on my car, slashed. A violent curse ripped from my throat. Jackson's car was untouched, but I knew what this meant. They were toying with us. They wanted us to see. Then, a sound, a deep guttural whistle from the darkness. A signal. Rocky's growl turned into a full-blown snarl. He arched his back, baring his teeth toward the brush at the edge of the lot. Something was there. Someone was watching. Waiting. I yanked the passenger door open and shoved the girls inside. Jackson scrambled to the driver's seat. "Go! Drive!" As Jackson fumbled with the keys, I risked one last glance toward the brush. A figure stood there, barely visible. Tall. Smiling. I slammed the door shut just as the engine roared to life. Gravel sprayed as Jackson floored it, peeling out onto the empty road. I twisted in my seat, watching the parking lot vanish behind us. The SUV was nowhere to be seen. Neither was the man. Neither was the second one. The drive back was silent. No one spoke. No one looked back. We never went to that beach again. I should have died that night. I think about that often. If I had been just a little more drunk, a little more careless, I probably wouldn't be here to tell this story. Because he was going to drug me, and I almost let him. Spring break in Miami. That's where this nightmare started. It was my first time there. My best friend Hannah and I had saved up for months just to make this trip happen. We weren't rich like the other spring breakers flooding the beaches, but we had enough for a cheap Airbnb in Wynwood, and a weekend of drinks, music, and bad decisions. Friday was supposed to be a chill beach day. We spent the afternoon lying, in the sun, laughing, watching drunk guys stumble over themselves trying to impress girls. That's when he walked up. I noticed him before he even spoke. He was perfect. Tall, lean but muscular, with dark hair, perfect teeth, and an effortless confidence that made him look like he belonged on a magazine cover. But it was his voice that really got me, smooth, charming, with a faint accent I couldn't place. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. Hannah and I exchanged a glance. Normally we shut guys down immediately, but this one, I don't know. He was different. His name was Liam. He asked what we were doing that night, and I barely hesitated before giving him my number. Big mistake. That evening, back at our Airbnb, I felt like an idiot for how giddy I was. I wasn't usually the type to trust random guys, but something about Liam made me want to. When I texted him, he responded almost immediately. He and his friend were going out in Wynwood. We should all meet up. Hannah was hesitant. "How do we even know he's legit?" I waved my phone. "We're meeting in public. What's the worst that could happen? Another mistake." At 9 p.m., Liam and his friend showed up at our Airbnb for drinks before the bar. His friend Mason was just as good-looking, maybe even more so. Hannah, who had been skeptical before, suddenly seemed very interested. We drank. Not much, just enough to loosen up. They seemed normal. Fun. Then we walked to the bar. It was loud, crowded, full of bodies pressed together under flashing neon lights. Liam stuck close to me, guiding me through the chaos like we were already a couple. It felt good. Safe, even. But I wasn't paying attention, because if I had been, I might have seen what he did next. The bar was packed. Neon lights flashed across, sweaty, laughing faces. The bass pounded so hard I could feel it in my chest. Liam leaned in close, his breath warm against my ear. "What do you want to drink?" I smiled, feeling the warmth of the alcohol already buzzing in my veins. "Tequila soda." He grinned. "Be right back." Hannah had disappeared with Mason somewhere deeper into the bar, so I sat alone, checking my phone, feeling a little too excited that Liam seemed into me. I had no idea how close I was to losing everything. A few minutes passed, then 5. I started to wonder if he had ditched me, but then I saw him, standing at the far end of the bar, hunched over my drink. My stomach tightened. He wasn't holding his phone. He wasn't waiting for the bartender. He was doing something to my drink. I squinted through the flashing lights, my mind sluggish from the alcohol, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was he putting something in it? Then he looked up. Our eyes met. I saw the flicker of realization cross his face. The second he knew I was watching him, he grabbed the drinks and turned toward me, his expression smooth, unreadable, like nothing had happened. Run. The thought slammed into my brain like a gunshot. My heart was suddenly hammering, my throat dry. I felt dizzy, like I had already been drugged, but I hadn't, because I didn't take the drink. I forced myself to stand, my legs trembling. I turned toward the exit, trying to act normal, trying not to panic. Then, my phone vibrated. A text. From Liam. "Where'd you go?" "I have your drink." My stomach lurched. He was looking for me. I pushed through the crowd, my hands shaking as I fumbled, to text Hannah. "Where are you?" "Something's wrong, we need to go." No response. I called her, straight to voicemail. That's when I knew. This wasn't just about me. They had her too. I rushed back into the crowd, my heart pounding in my chest. The flashing lights and pulsing music that had seemed so exhilarating before now felt disorienting and sinister. I had to find Hannah. I had to get us both out of there. I scanned the sea of faces, pushing past dancing bodies and drunken revelers. Every second felt like an eternity. Finally, I spotted her. She was with Mason, laughing and swaying slightly, a drink in her hand. My blood ran cold. I hurried over, trying to keep my composure. "Hannah, we need to go. Now." She looked at me, confusion in her eyes. "What? Why?" I leaned in close, my voice urgent. "Liam tried to drug me. We need to leave." Her eyes widened in shock. She looked at Mason, who was watching us with a puzzled expression. I grabbed her hand and pulled her away before he could react. We made our way to the exit, my heart still racing. I glanced back and saw Liam pushing through the crowd. His eyes locked on us. He knew we were on to him. We burst out of the bar into the cool night air. I hailed a cab, my hands still shaking. As we sped away, I looked back to see Liam and Mason standing outside the bar, their faces grim. Back at the Airbnb, we locked the doors and windows, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. We called the police, reporting what had happened. They took our statements and assured us they would investigate, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. Those guys were still out there, and we were still in danger. We spent the rest of the night huddled together, too afraid to sleep. Every noise made us jump, every shadow seemed to move. We booked the earliest flight home we could find, desperate to get out of Miami. As we left the next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The nightmare wasn't over. It was just beginning. And as we flew back home, I knew one thing for sure. I would never forget that night. The night I almost lost everything. The night I realized that sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who seem the most perfect. I don't know if I can ever enjoy a vacation the same way again. It was supposed to be a carefree spring break, Me and my best friend Rachel, escaping to Savannah, Georgia for a few days of relaxation. We'd booked a cozy little Airbnb in the historic district, a charming old house with creaky wooden floors and antique furniture. It felt like stepping into another time. But looking back, I should have noticed the warning signs. It started the second night. We were having dinner at a dimly lit seafood place, sipping on sweet tea and picking at fried shrimp when my phone buzzed. Just a single text. Hey. No name. No number I recognized. I stared at it for a second before showing Rachel. Wrong number, right? I asked, feeling an uneasy twist in my stomach. She shrugged. Probably. Just ignore it. So I did. But then, another text came in. Look outside. My blood turned cold. I whipped my head toward the window next to our table, expecting to see some drunk guy messing around, maybe a friend playing a prank. But all I saw was the quiet street, dimly lit by the glow of old-fashioned lanterns. People strolled past, oblivious. No one was looking in. Rachel leaned in, whispering, "Okay. That's weird." I tried to brush it off, but my mind was racing. My phone buzzed again. Anna, I nearly dropped it. That's when the real fear set in. Whoever this was, they knew my name. My breath hitched. Rachel saw the way my hands trembled as I gripped my phone. "How the hell do they know your name?" she whispered, her voice tight with fear. I couldn't answer. My mind raced, trying to grasp at something logical. Maybe a scam, maybe someone from school messing with me. But deep down, I knew this was real. Rachel's eyes widened. "Wait," she grabbed my arm. "Remember that cafe we went to yesterday? The one with the giveaway?" It hit me like a punch to the gut. We had scribbled our names and phone numbers onto those stupid little slips of paper, lured in by the promise of a free meal. At the time, it seemed harmless. Now my skin crawled at the thought. My phone buzzed again. "That's a nice red jacket." My stomach dropped. I was wearing a red jacket. Right now. In this restaurant. The feeling of being watched crashed down on me like ice water. My throat felt tight, my limbs suddenly too stiff to move. I scanned the high-tea room, my eyes darting between faces. No one was looking at me. No one obvious, at least. Rachel whispered, "We need to go. Now." I nodded. We tossed some cash onto the table and practically ran out of the restaurant. Our footsteps hurried against the uneven sidewalk. The air was thick with humidity, the scent of salt water and old stone filling my lungs. But all I could focus on was the shadows between the buildings, the empty doorways, the cars creeping too slow down the road. We weren't safe. Our Airbnb was only a few blocks away. Each step felt like a mile. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I kept looking behind us, half expecting someone to emerge from the darkness, but there was no one. At least I thought there was no one. Then Rachel stiffened beside me. She grabbed my arm, nails digging into my skin. "Anna," she breathed. Followed her gaze. Across the street, standing beneath a flickering street lamp, was a man. Tall, motionless, just watching. His hoodie obscured most of his face, but I could feel his stare, like a predator studying prey. A slow, knowing tilt of his head sent a primal chill racing up my spine. I pulled Rachel forward. "Don't run. Just walk. Keep walking." The Airbnb was close, just 2 more blocks. 1. We rounded the corner. The house was in sight, its porch light glowing like a beacon. I fumbled with my phone, pulling up the door code before we even hit the steps. Behind us, footsteps. Not running. Not even trying to be quiet. Just steady. Deliberate. Rachel yanked me inside the house, slamming the door shut. I punched in the code, and the lock clicked into place. Silence. I pressed my ear against the wood, barely breathing. For a long moment, nothing. No footsteps, no knocking. Then my phone vibrated. A single message. Let me in. I dropped my phone like it had burned me. The words on the screen seared into my brain. Let me in. Rachel's face went pale. Anna. What the hell? A sound cut her off. The doorknob rattled. Not a knock. Not a pounding fist. Just the slow, testing twist of the handle, as if whoever was out there already knew it was locked. Already knew we were inside. Already knew we were scared. Rachel stumbled backward, hands clamped over her mouth. I couldn't move. My pulse slammed against my ribs, my lungs straining to pull in air. Then the keypad beeped. Someone was trying to enter the code. The wrong code. Beep. The wrong code again. Beep. I grabbed Rachel, yanking her away from the door. Beep. My stomach lurched. How did he know there was a code? My phone vibrated on the floor. Another message. Open the back door, Rachel. Rachel choked on a sob. Her hands flew to her pockets, frantic, searching. Her phone. She pulled it out, staring at the screen. Her fingers shook as she turned it toward me. Her phone was dead. The messages weren't coming from her phone. Something sharp dug into my gut. Cold. Suffocating. It was never Rachel texting me. We ran. Bolted through the dark house, fumbling for something, anything to protect ourselves. The floor groaned beneath our feet, the weight of 100 years creaking through the walls. The only light came from the glow of the porch outside, where a shadow loomed. He was still there. Then the back door handle twisted. I gasped. Rachel, the back. Bang! The whole door shook in its frame. The old wood splintered. Rachel screamed. My hands scrambled for my phone, for the dial pad, for 911. The front doorknob turned. It wasn't locked. I don't remember throwing my body against it, but suddenly I was there, slamming it shut, twisting the lock so hard my wrist cracked. Rachel was sobbing behind me, her voice breaking as she begged, "Please, please, someone call." The siren. A flash of blue lights outside, tires screeching, the flood of a spotlight slicing through the porch. Then, silence. I barely dared to breathe. My body was locked in place, my fingers still gripping the knob, waiting for the next sound, the next movement. A knock. Firm. Controlled. Police. I broke, sagged to the floor, shaking so hard my teeth clacked together. Rachel flung the door open and a uniformed officer stood there, his flashlight cutting through the dark. They found him a few houses down, running, his hoodie half off, his face slick with sweat. He had my phone in his pocket, and worse, he had a knife. The police checked the security footage. He'd been outside for hours, watching, following us since dinner. He must have stolen Rachel's phone the second she put it down. Used it to lure me outside. And if I had opened that door, if I had believed, just for a second, that Rachel had been the one texting me, I wouldn't be here to tell this story. If you've survived this far and you're one of those who love fear and terror, then don't waste any time. I kindly ask you to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any content. The video you're watching on screen is just a taste of what's coming. Watch it. Thank you for being here, and see you next time, if you're capable of handling what's to come.